What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Relish the Journey. As always, you're hanging out with yours truly, Miles Biggs, and I'm joined today by Tim Seims, a guy I met out at the International Builder Show in Las Vegas earlier in 2020. We connected over podcasting and were introduced by a mutual connection, and this conversation really centers around some key words. The two that stuck with me are resilience and empathy, and we talk about Tim and his professional rise in a somewhat different fashion than most people might think of when they think of his current position, and also some of the struggles he had to overcome after the downturn in 2008, 2009, and sort of having to reinvent himself and just really dig in and be resilient. And so many great takeaways from this episode around that fact, and I really thank Tim for sharing some very personal stories with us that, you know, for many of us would be hard to share with the world, but he did. So I hope you all enjoy getting to know Tim Seims, and let's get into it. Tim, I'm glad we were able to lock this down. We were talking about it all the way back at the beginning of the year in Las Vegas for the National Builder Show, and now here we are all these months later. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad we got to meet there in Vegas at the Builders Show, and we had a date set up, but it was my bad. You know, I had something come up I couldn't avoid. So thanks for your flexibility and rescheduling. And here we are, and kind of interesting times. And it's, you know, in the building industry and housing, it's always interesting times. So it's great to be on here with you. Thanks for setting it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've alluded to that, but to get more to it, that is the industry you hail from is the building industry. You work for a company called Nishiha. So why don't you give us a little bit of an elevator pitch on who you are professionally before we get into you personally?
Yeah, thanks. So professionally, I work for a company called Nishiha. We've been around for since 1974 in the building envelope space. So building materials, cladding, siding, and then about almost 20 years here in the United States. And I came from a fiber cement siding background and construction background, building materials, lumber building materials sales background. And I've been at Nishiha for about 10 and a half years. So my job is segment manager for modular offsite construction. And I also manage the marketing and sales and messaging for the single family part of our business, which is the custom homes. Modern home is what we call it, but it's more like the commercial materials that you would use for cladding on commercial buildings in a single family home environment. So working on all of that with the sales teams, our marketing, and in the industry. So that's what I do, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
So if you could go back and talk to 18-year-old Tim, would he believe that you're doing what you're doing right now, or did you have other plans originally?
You know, 18-year-old Tim was headed to, was actually in diesel mechanics class, welding. My dad was in the trades. My grandpa was a longshoreman. My uncle had a construction company, and I just kind of fell into construction. I'd started mowing lawns and helping with repairs and house repairs, home repairs when I was 13. Then I worked for a company called Birch Equipment in Bellingham, Washington. They're still around. And that was a heavy equipment rental place. And I really got to know that kind of vernacular of construction. For some reason, my brain kind of picks up on and really consumes a glossary of an industry. And when that was kind of when I fell in love with construction. And when I was 18, I was thinking, okay, college, or what do I do? And I decided to go into construction. And what I would say to 18-year-old Tim is, most people in the industry are doing their best, but part of it's fake it till you make it, and find out the information as you go along. And the other part is being sure of your skills. And I wasn't as sure of my skills then. I think that's what advice I would have given is everyone kind of has this sort of imposter syndrome, which we didn't really have a word for it then, and just to press forward. But I did get started in construction and really enjoyed that process, remodeling and welding here and there and fixing equipment, and then doing some drywall and trim carpentry. And then what really kind of kicked it off was Hurricane Iniki in 1991 in Hawaii. I went over there to work on repairs, insurance repairs and so forth. That's what my uncle did, was fire and water damage and remodeling. I went with him and my cousin, and ended up getting chances to volunteer there and do some volunteer work along with the paid work. And that was a lot of fun. And that opened my eyes to seeing how other people were working and bidding, and kind of everything was being done on the fly. And I was like, there isn't as much a science to this as there is an art to construction and bidding and estimating, and just being a really good communicator. Maybe that's the other advice I'd give myself is, be very transparent and communicate well and follow up well, because not everyone knows exactly what's going on or how a project's going to turn out. And it doesn't really matter the type of project. There are certain known variables, and then there's a lot of unknown variables. So that was kind of where my career started off, and that put me in. Then got married and had kids, and I did all this instead of going to college. So by the time my buddies were out of college, I was making about $25 an hour as a framer and working on commercial residential jobs. I had no debt and had a house, a little family, and so I always felt like I was a little bit ahead of where some of my friends that came out of college were, because I think they spent a lot of time still finding out what they wanted to do, and I never had a doubt. So that set me on a path to lumber and building material sales after doing some construction and building some apartments, and then going out on my own. Then I went into sales, and after a while, I started to sell enough of a certain product that the manufacturer recruited me. That was a company called James Hardie. And then after a while there, then I ended up at Nichiha. And so that was like I said, a little over 10 years ago. And that career path has been a story of its own, from being in sales to marketing and doing some startups internally with different segments of business. And so that's kind of been my specialty: start something and then get it ready for sales, launch it, and then move on to a new project. So that is my career path up to now.
Nice. Yeah, it's Tim Seims in 5 minutes there. That was good. What I like about that path you just laid out is I think most people would have, at the middle of that path, right? They wouldn't assume that the first half was not going to college and working the trades. When they look at the position you'd have now, I'm sure a lot of people assume you went to college and took the traditional route, right? So I think it's really a good testament to the fact that the trades are a viable career path for a lot of people, for all the reasons you rattled off. Great experience. You learn everything from the ground up. You're not saddled with debt when you get out of school. There's so many pros. If people could get over the social stigma of it all, I think a lot more people would do it.
Yeah. And I think, there are some things that are opening that up, that stigma, new dynamics in the marketplace we're seeing right now could definitely, I think, invite younger ones, maybe that were thinking more white collar, to look at this, the construction industry and the different careers that are available. Talking like marketing, data science, analysis, computer software, BIM modeling. You don't need to be an architect to be a BIM expert. You can take on all sorts of different courses and certifications to get where you want to go without that sort of time commitment and student debt and so forth. And that's part of what our podcast is about, is kind of trying to attract talent and build perspectives and a positive voice about the building industry. And I think that's kind of how you and I met, through various people on that platform. And it's been a lot of fun to talk to people with all sorts of different varied career paths in construction. And that's even opened my eyes in several different ways. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so I want to jump all the way back to something you said in the first couple of minutes here. You mentioned the phrase imposter syndrome, which is one of my favorite topics, because I feel like I've struggled with that for a long time, hell, up to 2 years ago. I had it in my head that, everyone was going to find me out, there I was 26, 27, and I was general manager of a large housing company, and I'm looking around going, who who hit their head and gave me this job, right? Like they're gonna find out I have no idea what I'm doing. Just that self-talk was not good, and I think it held me back in a bunch of ways and added unnecessary stress to the situation. And since gotten over that, I've turned 30 and I feel like I'm an adult now at 30 years old and 3 gray hairs in my beard. No one can call me
Nice.
the kid now. So what's your experience with that, Ben? You mentioned it, and I just love talking to people about that because when people don't have a name to put to it, right? Before you first hear that phrase imposter syndrome, I feel like most people think they're the only person feeling that way. And then when you put a label to it and hear other people's stories, it's super powerful to sort of take the power away from that feeling.
Yeah, there's some things I wish they taught in high school, shop class and a lot of things are now gone, shop class, home ec. There's certain topics that just aren't part of the education system on the public side anymore. And I think part of that emotional intelligence would have been great to understand what that self-talk is and, what that, we're powerful. We're all powerful in some way, but we kind of refuse to believe it. And a lot of times other people believe in us more. And we've definitely I'm sure you've had people that believed in you and you were like, why do you even treat me so good? That sort of stuff. And,
yeah.
And I guess there were times along the way where, my upbringing with my dad and mom are very resilient and had been through a lot. And I kind of watched that growing up. And I always knew that things could get worse, but they could also get a lot better. And I think that there was a confidence I had, but I was always careful to check that with the reality that anything I'd accomplished could be gone in a moment. And but that didn't stop me, that sort of confidence, from sort of wondering, like, why am I in charge of a division that's doing $67 million a year? And I learned how to read a P&L on the fly. I went to University of Phoenix in my 30s only because there was tuition reimbursement from the company I was working with. Otherwise, I might not have. But, there was so much I just consumed and learned along the way. And I think that, it's one of those skills I would also say to 18-year-old Tim and any young people or anyone at any age really is, really cultivating that mindset of resilience. And that, yes, things can get worse, but they can also get better, and don't ever give up. And that sort of mindset's helped me a lot. And whenever I have that sort of like, what am I doing? Who are these people to, put this in my hands? I remember that there's a reason, and to be okay with not knowing everything and learning from people along the way. Like, I learned from people like you and Audrey and Dave Cooper and other people in the industry, John McManus at Builder Magazine and John Burns and Todd Tamalak. And, I could just name a litany of folks that I'm constantly learning from. And when I started to really consume things that way, it over time built a confidence that sort of grounded me. But every once in a while, I'll be working on something and be that old feeling will come back, like, okay, I'm out of my depth here. And then I remember, oh yeah, I can call people for help, or I can get some information on this, or, time to like put the headphones in and brain.fm and jam on Focus Channel and get something done. So those things have helped me sort of cope with that feeling.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's funny you mentioned brain.fm. I've not used that, but you listen to like binaural beats on that, and it's all the different frequencies that program your brain to focus, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And
isn't it wild how much that works? It's like freaky. It makes you wonder what's
it blows
actually
me away.
happening to my brain.
Yeah, and if I was hearing the founder talk about it, or go online and find out about it, or talk to some of the salespeople there, I'd be kind of like, reading some of the copy online, I'd be like, well, I don't know. But honestly, I heard about it on Mixer G's podcast, Andrew Warner's podcast, And because he endorsed it, an unpaid endorsement, he just brought it up in an interview one time. I checked it out. And ever since, if I need to get something done, I swear sometimes I can get, 2 or 3 hours worth of work done in 20 minutes just by having that going. And those are the sort of things like that accomplishment. You build a record of things, getting things done and executing at a high level. Now, over time, then you can find ways to cope with that imposter syndrome. Now, people will then entrust bigger projects to you, and you have to treat it the same way. Like, okay, I did these things. How did I do it? I got help. I did research. I sucked in some knowledge, and I put my neck on the line, and that's the formula I'm going to continue with. And it may bite us at some point, but most of the time it's going to be a powerful approach.
Yeah, for sure. It's the same sort of methodology will work at whatever level you are at. I think if you ever lose that feeling of, oh crap, what am I doing? Then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. It's always good to feel, it's always good to feel a little bit uncomfortable, because that's how you get stronger, right? It's just like working out.
What's that saying? Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Yeah. I've definitely experienced that over the years.
Yeah, I can agree with that for sure. And you mentioned Dave Cooper. He said to say hi, by the way. I was talking to him today.
Love that guy.
I told him we were talking.
Man, that whole little community of you guys, everyone seems so kind of spread out geographically. Now we do these podcasts and Zoom calls and webinars and stuff together. And I love that way we can connect. Those guys are very cool.
Yeah. And he was saying, I don't know if there's a story here, but I'll just ask that he was doing a live stream with you and you were in an Airstream, a live stream in an Airstream. Is there you go?
Hey, that's a good one. Live stream in Airstream. I didn't even make that.
It could be a YouTube channel right there. But were you cross country traveling, or is that just where you have a silent room to get on and talk away from screaming kids or something?
Well, if you saw me right now, I'm in my tree house that has like a little loft and it's built around 2 big Doug firs. And then on the other side of the house is an Airstream. Friends of ours that are sailing a catamaran in the British Virgin Islands right now and taking customers on long trips and et cetera. They keep their Airstream here. And so I use that for my home office, alternating it with the treehouse. And so Dave texted me. He says, I'm on the LinkedIn Live and I'm trying to, keep it together. Of course, he's totally capable of that, doing it any kind of video on his own, because he's so knowledgeable and easy on these topics. But anyhow, he texted me. I'm like, I'm getting there. And I sat down in a huff and got my microphone all ready, and then he got some video of me in the treehouse. It was kind of comical.
That's funny. And that's
in the Airstream.
In the Airstream. And that's sort of that's a line of conversation there, right? About it sounded like there was a little bit of a panic and he's on and waiting for you. And there's that unseen side to all this content creation. Like you have a podcast just like 100%. I do. And so I think a lot of people listen to these talks and make so many assumptions about things that do or don't happen. So do you have any other funny failures or learning moments, or just the things that nobody saw but are just, they wouldn't believe unless they were there when it comes to your side of content?
Well, I think that, some things that had happened that were kind of comical is, sometimes I think that it's just the best. Oh man, that went really well. And I listened back to it. I'm like, I kind of pick it apart, and get kind of hard on myself, and the things I think are important are never the ones that people seem to comment about or anything like that. Like, oh no, the microphone was rubbing and I could hear it through the whole thing, or I tried to publish something, with no edits and I'm saying and clearing my throat the whole time. And,
right.
And
or somebody they were smacking their lips together and all that, those mouth noises that drive me crazy. I hate that stuff.
Exactly. When Caroline and I first started recording, Zach Williams at Venveo, Smarter Building Materials Marketing, they have a podcast, great podcast for the industry, especially on marketing, but just building industry in general. And he goes, when we first started, I had to have a drink before every episode, like the first 3 or 4 episodes. And so because of my travel schedule and Carolina's travel schedule at the time, and her being in California, me being in Washington, we tried to coordinate some in-person, episodes when I was down there and she was in Seattle, and just never seemed to work out. And so finally we just decided we're going to do it in the evenings. And I'm like, well, perfect. I can have a glass of wine or something while I'm doing this, like Zach said. And then the first time I spilled it everywhere because I'm not used to setting everything up, so I still have some, like, I'm sure there's some wine down in my old MacBook. Thankfully it's not my new one. You're recording. So like, okay, well, that was funny, and get to it later. And I think that those outtakes are just kind of like what, we actually ended up keeping that in the episode, but you can't take things too seriously. It's at the end of the day, yes, we're building communities and cities and audiences and stuff like that. But, as Marie Forleo's book says, she's famous for saying everything is figure outable. And so I really live by that every day. And it's something I wish I would have thought of myself years ago, but it's kind of a word that defines kind of how I treat every day. So when you have those things happen, you just kind of go, okay, what next?
Yeah. Yeah. The podcast must go on, right?
Right. Exactly.
And I do love that quote about everything being figure outable. It's so true. It goes back to the imposter syndrome, right? It's just, you put your head down and you make it so that you're not the imposter by putting the work in and you figure it out.
Right. Right. Exactly.
I'm curious for your career, going back to that a little bit, it's not media related per se, right? It's sales and marketing related, but I'm curious because people ask me this a lot. How has podcasting helped me in my career, even though it's something I do in my own time? I'll ask that same question to you. Do you think podcasting has helped you in your career with Nishiha, or is it completely separate?
I'd say, I couldn't really say one way or another if it's monetized anything from a, sales, sort of standpoint. But I think what it's done is kind of what we were hoping to do, is connect with more people and connect with sort of like-minded people, folks that are interested in building community, making information available. There's been largely in the building industry, but, it's not isolated to the building industry. It is this sort of like, I have this information and I'm just going to hoard it to myself. And that doesn't really help. That's kind of why these kind of archaic systems and processes and methodologies are still being employed in the building industry. And what's kind of held it back is that lack of transparency. So, we're just all trying to make this information available, and you'll hear that, sometimes maybe there are some that are, about getting people to a website and clicking on a download and then getting them into a subscription program or, some that sort of clickbait mentality. But, we're just honestly just trying to get information and perspective out there for people. They can like, hey, this sucks, I don't like this, or maybe, yeah, that was pretty interesting, but nothing else really, caught my fancy. I think that's what has that sort of connection has helped. I think internally at Nichiha, there are some folks that like hearing kind of broader scopes of the business and the industry and about careers and sort of even some global things that come up, that we talk about. And I think that's helped me connect with people inside the company too, that I normally wouldn't get a chance to visit with or know, or may otherwise, hey, Tim's in Seattle, I'm in Atlanta, but instead we can have that connection and keep that sort of knowledge going. And I think too, whenever you talk honestly and transparently about issues or opportunities or anything like that, and about your own self, I think that endears people to you and your company. I think over time there may be some connection to customer lifetime value and monetization, sales, and so forth, but that's not the intent at all. And I think if that ever did become part of the story, I'd have to really question what I'm doing. So I would encourage people to get their voice out there, to be a voice, to be something positive, to share information and get a kind of more collaborative and less competitive. And that's kind of been our main focus, getting into it. And definitely, I think recruiters have called me a lot more.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
But you know, I don't really look at it from that angle. You know, I figure if I'm doing my best every day, then and I'm treating my company right, and they're treating me right, and we're looking out for each other's best interests and our people's best interests and our customers' experience and journey, then I think you're working on those things. You're working on the right things.
Yeah, and it's that old adage that people buy from people that they like. And I feel like podcasting is a great way to do that. It just gets you out there. People get familiar with your personality and your voice. They associate that with the company. The two become one. And eventually they may not know where they heard your name, or your voice might sound familiar, or they just feel like they know you, and it ties back to the content that you've been putting out consistently. And I feel like it's made me, at least, just a better conversationalist when the podcast isn't happening either, right? Just talking to all these different people about all these different subjects, you get really good at thinking on your feet and just engaging in conversation, which is an awesome skill to have, whether you're recording it or not.
Yeah, I mean, you can always talk to people. I'm sure you've spoken with folks, and it's not good or bad, but you speak to folks sometimes, and the conversation is a lot about what they're doing and so forth, and that's fine as long as there's a sharing of information, some sort of knowledge transfer, or something that is genuine and authentically interesting and interested. But what the best thing is to find that we learn from finding out about others. We already know about ourselves, or maybe we should. If not, there's therapy for that.
Yeah.
But we can learn so much from each other. I made some really good friends, and another thing that's interesting that's come out of this, Miles, is the sort of exchanges of podcast content. So I was just listening to New Home Insights, which is a John Burns podcast, and Zach Williams was on that, and then John Burns was on Zach's podcast, and and that's happened in my case too. And you have some sort of overlap. Like, I'm sure you've been on podcasts, you've also been the host. You have some overlap when you're kind of recreating or reusing information, or repurposing, recycling, whatever you want to call it. But there's usually some other kind of unique take on it as we're kind of reprocessing things. And of course, like in marketing, people need to hear things a minimum of 7 times. Some marketers say over 40 times, multiple messages on the same subject. So if you're gonna make changes in industry, or people's careers, or encourage folks and give them confidence, then it's gonna take time, and that sort of overlap's super important too. So those are some great things that I think have come out of it.
Yeah, and you talked about getting to know other people, and so I'm curious, as we get to know you, what is something through all this content creation you've done, networking, your time in the industry, you're known to a lot of people, but what's something that people still don't know about Tim Seims? What's a hidden secret fun fact that you could share with us to get to know you better through this podcast?
Yeah, I think it's not that I've ever been, shied away from it or anything like that, but that kind of goes back to that everything is figure outable. In 2008, I was working at a lumberyard as a sales manager of a regional chain of lumberyards. It was between actually James Hardy and Nichiha, and that was a really fun job. And then the downturn, and then that lumber chain sold to a national lumber building materials supplier, two-step distributor. And during that time, I also owned with my wife a automated spa, which sounds really cool now that we're in the age of bots. But at the time, it was a lot of it was a big learning experience. I'd never been in a retail environment like that, and that we had to close it. The downturn basically just crushed us, and we lost our house and cars, and we ended up being in a really tough situation with our two young kids, and fortunately we have a pretty great support network, and we had friends that had a little apartment above the garage, and we lived there for about a year and a half until we could get back on our feet. And Nichiha was part of that story, and that time hit a lot of people, and it definitely took a toll, emotionally, I think, on our kids, and I think there are things that we all learned about ourselves and each other during that time, and some of it is powerful and positive, and some of it is like, hey, I could have made better decisions. But I think one thing I credit to being able to a couple things I credit to being able to cope with that and come out of it in a much better space, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and career wise, is the support network of friends we had. That that was kind of a give and take. We were helping other people out, they were helping us, and the industry as well, the same thing. I had friends in the industry and that were in similar positions, and that support network, and then that attitude of resilience. We talk a lot about resilience in construction, architecture, and design, and resilience on how our capital and our tech stack is doing in our business. But if none of that matters if we don't have resilient people, and I really credit that to my dad and my mom. They really went through much tougher circumstances than I've ever been through, and they never gave up, and they always took care of each other, and they had that solid support base too, and were always very generous. And so a lot of people know that part of my story, or our story, but I think that there's a reason why you say that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And that may sound calloused when people are in the thick of things, but it's so true. And I just encourage people to all like time to just not give up, to see something through. We need humans to see things through and to see what they're capable of by not giving up. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that was a hard time, but it's also was a really fun time to learn more about myself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I did not expect that answer. That had to be very hard. I can't imagine. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm just thinking while you're talking, what would I do if that happened to me? And that I could definitely see how times could turn dark if something like that happened. That's crazy to think about.
Well, look, there are downturns, times when millions of people lose jobs and houses and stuff like that. But it's amazing how the human spirit and people holding hands and sticking together can get through things. And there's a lot of other things at play too. But that is that's just something I hope actually that a lot of people get to learn about themselves, through hardship.
Yeah. So we've gone from 18-year-old Tim all the way through to you today, and things you're working on and lessons you've learned. How would you summarize your journey, right? Because this is Relish the Journey. We've relished it here together. How would you summarize it all in 3 words?
I would say, I'd say work in progress.
Okay.
That I'm always learning. I'm conflicted a lot of times. I get wild hairs about, what I want to do, in business and as a family and so forth. And I make mistakes, and I also, am always learning. And I think that as I'm getting, I'm 47 now, and as I'm learning over time, I'm losing some of that. Like, I'm starting to develop empathy for people in different situations, and understanding that everyone's a work in progress, and that maybe we think someone should have done something differently, or more, made smarter moves or made better decisions. But look, we're all, there's this saying on The Office where Dwight gets asked by the camera person, what's the most inspiring thing Michael Scott ever said to you? Dwight thinks about it for a minute, and he says, "Don't be an idiot. It changed my life." whenever I'm going to do something, I ask myself, would an idiot do this thing? And if an idiot would, then I do not do that thing. And it's kind of an oversimplification, but it just illustrates, like, you know, we all have things we're working on, and everyone you meet, you know, which kind of goes back to your podcast, you know, Relish the Journey. Everyone has a story. And so ask, you know, find out what the story is, and, you know, share that experience, and just understand that we're all a work in progress.
Yeah, I love that. And another great word, you've had a lot of great words on this. Resilience, empathy is one you just brought up. I think that's so true, right? If we could just extend grace more in our lives to people and understand that they're a work in progress, like you said, and that they're always trying to do their best, even if it's not to our standards, if we just give everyone that benefit of the doubt, we'd all be a lot happier, and the world would be a much more positive place. More people working together than working against one another, for sure.
It's, you know, you're right, and that's a really good point. I mean, empathy, it comes and goes. It kind of depends on where we are in life. You got to work at it, and I think for every time I feel like, you know, I'm connecting with someone at that level, there are 100 times when I put my foot in my mouth, or you know, I miss an opportunity to build someone up or to ask something thoughtful, and so, but we just keep at it.
Yeah, like you said, you're a work in progress, right? So you'll keep keeping at it. It's never over. All right. Well, this podcast is over. How's that for a segue? I'm out of questions.
I love it. I love your intro too, by the way, man. If I want to be jazzed up, there are a few intros I'll listen to, and that's a really good one.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So where can people find you if they want more of Tim Seims and what you have to offer? Where can we point them to after this episode?
Build Perspectives podcast is fine. You know, we'd love to have people check us out there, and then just LinkedIn. I'm trying to keep it to just a couple platforms. You know,
Sure.
It's hard to keep track. You know, keep on top of everything. And I don't have a social media team or anything. And I definitely don't have any discipline in that. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Or, I mean, people can email me too if they want, but I think, you know, messaging me on LinkedIn is kind of where a lot of folks are going.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, man, thanks for, you know, now I am going to go have a glass of wine I won't spill on my laptop.
There you go.
But yeah, thanks for doing this, and thanks for doing the podcast. You know, that's like, I love how well-rounded it is. And I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, it sounds like you have a couple months of episodes coming up. So I'm stoked about that. And thanks for including me.
All right. That's a wrap for another episode of Relish the Journey. As always, thank you all so much for listening. It means a lot to me if you would subscribe to the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Help us spread the word on what we're trying to do here with interviewing the world. And as always, everybody, until next time, cheers.